Welcome to another edition of Under the Radar. I'm your host Atul Aneja. The Chinese Communist Party has just completed the 20th Party Congress. This is one in a 5-year event. And what we observe after the end of this Party Congress is that, as expected, Chinese President Xi Jinping has consolidated his position. And now the stage is set for another episode of the rise of China. Now, what can we expect in the next 5 years, from now till the 21st Party Congress takes place in 2027? Where will China go? What can we expect in terms of its first steps now that the Party Congress is over? Over the next few minutes, we will examine these very possibilities and see what implications it has for China, for the world, and especially how does it impact India. I think one of the first priorities of the Chinese President Xi Jinping would be Taiwan. And we saw that Taiwan was already in the limelight when Nancy Pelosi, the US House Representative Chief, visited Taiwan. And the Chinese reacted very sharply to that event. And there is a reason why that reaction was so sharp. In fact, we saw the mobilization of huge forces by the Chinese. In fact, a very blockade of Taiwan was done, but because the 20th Party Congress was coming, I think they hesitated and did not go through with what their plans might have been about Taiwan. But why are the Chinese so adamantly fixated on Taiwan? And to understand that, we'll have to go back to 1951, to the thick and to the heart of the Cold War. It was 1951 when the Korean War had started. The Chinese were on one side along with the North Koreans. There were the Americans with General MacArthur coming into the fray. And it was a hot war. It was a conflict which was being fought. And that was a time when Dulles decided that we have to contain China. In fact, at that time, since it was 51, it was a containment of both China and the Soviet Union. But Soviet Union collapses in 1991. So it's the Chinese which remain at the center of the containment strategy, which was framed by none other than John Foster Dulles. Now, Dulles was ingenious in recognizing and leveraging the geography of the area. The entire American strategy of a containment was containing the waters of the Pacific, the North Pacific. Then you have the East China Sea, South China Sea, and further then you go south. And then, of course, there's the Southern Pacific. Now, the American strategy was really to leverage the island chains which are straddled in 3 layers in that area. You have the first island chain, which starts from the Kuril Islands, which is disputed between the Japanese and the Russians. And then you go southwards towards mainland Japan. And south of Japan is what is called the Ryukyu Island chain. Now, this is a lengthy island chain of hundreds of islands, and the heart of it is a place called Okinawa. Now, the idea of the Americans was to militarize the first island chain. That is, right from the north, move southwards. Okinawa, of course, became the heart of this militarization. But that's not the end of it. From Okinawa, the island chain go to Taiwan, which is the middle point. And from Taiwan, it goes towards Western Philippines. Thereafter, the first island chain loops towards Borneo in Indonesia and ends with the Malacca Strait. Now, this was the area which got militarized big time. And as a result of it, any Chinese activity inside the island chains would be completely monitored by the Americans and their allies, who dominate the seas. Now, there's a parallel second island chain as well, which sort of gives a padding to the first island chain or reinforces the first island chain. And this is from 3 islands in Japan, the Bonin Islands they are called, and the Volcano Islands. Now, these are south of Tokyo. And then the second island chain goes southwards, and one of the main bases of the Americans is Guam. So Guam becomes part of the second island chain. It goes further south towards Micronesia and West Papua New Guinea. So you have these two island chains juxtaposed to each other, which are again militarized. Guam, of course, is the fortress which the Americans have created and really the base for their power projection in the region. Now, on top of the first and second island chain, there is a third island chain which has been part of the containment of China. And this starts from the Aleutian Islands. This is right in the north, in the northern Pacific. And then it goes towards the eastern end of Philippines and then loops downwards and comes towards New Zealand. So these are the three islands which are in active communication with each other, which are maintaining a very tight surveillance over the Pacific, especially the Western Pacific and the Northern Pacific. That's the area which is not far from the Chinese mainland. So any shipping activity which takes place in the Chinese waters and southwards towards East China Sea, South China Sea, towards West Pacific, towards the Philippine Sea, it's all under very tight surveillance. Why? Because all the islands which I've spoken to it are heavily militarized, heavily equipped to maintain complete dominance over these waters of the Pacific. Now, the Chinese know this, that if they have to ensure their rise, they have to contain the waters, because these are the trade routes, the trade arteries, and as Alfred Mahan has said, one who controls the trade routes one who controls the waters dominates geopolitically the entire region, or words to that effect. I'm sorry I couldn't get the exact quote of Alfred Mahan, but essentially that's the idea, that you dominate the sea lanes. And how do you do that with the Americans and others so strongly dominating the entire area? So that's the Chinese problem. And that is precisely why Taiwan becomes very important. Why is Taiwan so important? It is because of its location, because it has got very deep waters. If the Chinese can get access to Taiwan and deploy, for example, their nuclear submarines in those waters, in the Strait of Taiwan, they go west, they can go anywhere, and they are out of the monitoring system of the West led by the Americans, and therefore their capacity then to threaten vast areas of the Pacific grows hugely. And that is the reason why, for China, in a geopolitical context, in a maritime context, dominating and getting control of the Taiwan is so essential, because Taiwan means liberation of China. It goes a quantum leap in China's aspirations to become a great power. And if you hear Xi Jinping, not in this party congress, but in the 2017 party congress, what he had said was that our goal is 2049, the 100 years of the formation of the People's Republic of China, when China would be number one in all spheres, whether it's military, whether it's economic, whether it's cultural. It will be the Chinese century. So in some way, Taiwan is a centerpiece of reaching those aspirations which go up to 2050. With the freedom to move in the Pacific, with Taiwan providing the anchorage, the Chinese can even threaten the Americans militarily. And they become not only a military force to reckon with, but as I said earlier, if you control Taiwan, you are in a pole position to also have your influence, and at some point probably dominance, over the trade routes which are coming into the Indo-Pacific, because that's the region which is probably growing at the fastest rate anywhere in the world. And it won't end with Taiwan, because if you have a hold over Taiwan, then the Chinese would be able to influence very, very important choke points in that part of the waters. One, for example, is called the Malacca Straits. Now, the Malacca Straits is the channel between the Malacca Island, and north of that is the southern tip of Okinawa. So that's the channel in which, if you can move through that, then you again move into the Pacific, and in a way, then you escape the island chain trap which has been laid out for you. So that's one thing which probably will whittle away as a sequel to the Chinese dominance of Taiwan. The second very important area is called the Bashi Channel. The Bashi Channel is a very windy and a stormy place, quite for a nightmare for mariners. But there is one thing about Bashi Channel which is very important. Just to acquaint you with Bashi Channel, this is part of the Luzon Strait, which is coming from the Philippine side and entering the South China Sea. So it's a very important strait within, a very important channel within the Luzon Strait. Now, why is it important? Because beneath the Bashi Channel is a cluster of internet cables which is connecting Asia with the internet. So if you are dominating the Bashi Channel, remember the Chinese many times carry on their air maneuvers over the Bashi Channel, but that is to send a message. Because if you can control Bashi Channel, you can cut the internet lines which are feeding into the ASEAN. And that can be a catastrophic blow, especially in this digital age. So I don't think Taiwan will be the last area which the Chinese would like to dominate. Miyako would be one. Bashi Channel would be another one. And third is probably the conflict which is going on over the Diaoyu Islands, of which the Chinese call them that, and Senkaku, the Japanese call it that. These are islands in the East China Sea. And that's one area from where you can get a good, if you control that area, you can get a good access again into the Miyako Strait. So I think there will be several or a serial conflict areas for control, especially those which are close to the choke points and the major trading and military arteries of this region, which will come into contestation following the Chinese takeover of Taiwan. And therefore, I think from a strategic point of view, Xi Jinping, a man who believes he's a man of history, and he will be the main architect after Mao and Deng Xiaoping to ensure the rise of China and to achieve the Chinese dream. I think he wants to go down in history. He wants to resurrect China as a civilizational state in a very imperial hubris rather than a socialist or a Marxist paradigm. So I think he is going to take some action when it comes to Taiwan. Will that mean actual military invasion? Not sure. I mean, can he generate a regime change through an internal sort of a turmoil or an internal coup? Possibly that would be the first option, and not necessarily exercise of the military option. Will this obsession of China on Taiwan, the inner urge to completely control at all costs the Taiwanese islands, because it's not just one island, but there's several other smaller ones as well. What would it mean for India? I think India needs to be awake to this possibility of China's complete control of Taiwan, because I think once they start controlling Taiwan, if at all they achieve, and it can lead to a conflict in between, which we are very well aware with the Americans in the West. Now, I think the Chinese will look towards the Malacca Straits. Remember, the Malacca Straits is the link between the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean, specifically the South China Sea. And control over this channel is vital for international trade. I mean, billions and billions of dollars of trade actually passes through the Malacca Straits. And once the Chinese have their eyes on the Malacca Straits, then they get deeply into the Indian Ocean, which is India's, at least parts of it is India's backyard. And that's where India needs to be very concerned about a counter strategy to eliminate or to ward off this possible threat which could be coming from China if it manages to control Taiwan. India has to have a response to what might happen if the Chinese manage to control Taiwan after the 20th Party Congress. But what that response should be would be the stuff and the substance of another episode of Under the Radar. Hope you enjoyed this episode, and looking forward to your feedback, to your live interaction with us, to tell us where we went right and where we went wrong, and take the conversation forward.